I think everybody's here now, so we'll resume for the afternoon session. And first up is Councillor Waterson. Councillor, did you manage to get copies to distribute of your statements?
Yes, thank you, sir.
Yeah, let's get those handed out first of all.
Has got several extra copies.
Good, thank you.
Just let him distribute, and thank you for obliging me on,
no, that's quite
on the
all right.
timetable.
So I'll just mark this up. According to my list, we're now on to document 19. Councillor, would you just like to start by introducing yourself to the inquiry, explain who you are, who you represent, and then go through the points you'd like to make? And my understanding is from the joint parish councils that you're concentrating on ecological matters.
Yes, sir. My name is Nigel Waterson. I'm an elected member of Stovolds Parish Council, and I'm duly authorised by the council to give this evidence. I have appeared and given evidence at several recent planning hearings. One topic that invariably comes up is biodiversity and ecology. We are a rural community within an AGLV and a candidate area for the expansion of the Stovolds Hills AONB. Our area is teeming with wildlife and their natural habitats. And why does this matter for this inquiry? The normal process is, of course, for a formal planning application to be submitted with the applicant, the local planning authority, parish councils and individuals, leading detailed evidence on biodiversity, among other issues. This usually involves detailed reports from experts from both sides and often from independent bodies like the Surrey Wildlife Trust. This allows a careful weighing up of the likely effect on the landscape and biodiversity, as well as looking at issues like biodiversity net gain and mitigations in the form of conditions. Unfortunately, this has often not happened for Stovolds because due process has simply not been followed. The normal planning rules have been flouted and hard-standing and mobile homes have been unilaterally imposed on a greenfield area in ever-increasing numbers and without planning consent being granted or even sought. I would endorse the judgment of Mr. Sibbott, who I believe is giving evidence later on in this inquiry, that the ecological evidence now produced by the appellants is wholly inadequate. Apart from any other shortcomings, the appellants seem to depend on a baseline ecological assessment post the development rather than prior to it. I also agree with Mr. Sibbott that there is no serious attempt by the appellants at proper mitigation. In Dunsfold, much recent evidence has been provided as part of planning applications and appeals relating to North Grattan Chase, Coombury Cottage and Chennells Field. I believe these are highly relevant because they are only about a mile away from Stovolds Hill as the crow flies. The relevant protected species include badgers. There are badger sets with badgers observed living and foraging here in Dunsfold on the area surrounding Coombury, and other badger sets have been observed around other parts of the village. It is an offence to harm badgers and their habitats under the 1992 Act. Great crested newts. The great crested newt Triturus cristatus is strictly protected due to enormous declines in range and abundance in the last century. They have full protection under UK law, making it an offence to kill, injure, capture, or disturb them, or to damage or destroy their habitats. The Dunsfold Amphibian Rescue Team, colloquially known as the Toad Patrol, consists of local volunteers who go out in all weathers to monitor and save amphibians tried across the main road through Dunsfold during the spawning season. In recent years, they have recorded and/or saved literally hundreds each year, including great crested newts. Sir, the latest detailed statistics have been submitted in evidence and show that over 1,000 amphibians were saved, including a significant number of great crested newts. I have seen Mr. Sibbott's expert views set out in his several reports. He is clear about the loss of deciduous woodland and that this was a principal habitat which may cause harm to, among other species, great crested newts. He also refers to the loss of a watercourse and of grassland. I should just point out that evidence of the presence of great crested newts should not be limited to their breeding ponds. They actually travel significant distances within a range of up to 1 kilometre from their breeding ponds. Then there are bats. According to Natural England and the Forestry Commission, Beckstein and Barbastell bats have been noted in nearby Chiddingfold Forest. Additionally, in a survey in 2021, Ecosa, recorded at least 6 species of foraging and commuting bats, including common pipistrelle, Pipistrellus pipistrellus, soprano pipistrelle, and long-eared bats. Regarding the Stovolds site, it has been observed, it's common ground, I think, that trees have been cut down, reducing habitat for roosting bats. Also, bats need darkness, which is not usually a nighttime feature of this site. I'll come on to that again. And trees and hedgerows provide highways for all kinds of fauna. Disrupting them can be extremely harmful. There are also rare and protected plants and other creatures observed in our locality. Chamomile, that's Chamomilium nobile, is classified as vulnerable on the vascular plant red data list for Great Britain. Other observations from local residents include deer, nightingales, barn and small owls, crows, jackdaws, woodpeckers, red-legged partridge, various songbirds, plus numerous small mammals, shrews, wood mice, hedgehogs, grass snakes, slowworms, dragonflies, stormflies, wood bees, maybugs, beetles, adders, moths, and butterflies. Indeed, Mr. Sibbett makes specific reference to the endangered wood white butterfly. May I briefly touch on another topic, light pollution. Dunsfeld is a so-called dark village with no street lighting and restrictions on external lighting of any sort. May I invite you, sir, to drive through our village at night and then contrast it with the encampment at Stovolds. This is reminiscent of the Blackpool eliminations or the Manhattan skyline and is wholly out of character with the local settled communities and detrimental for bats and other nocturnal species. It also has an urbanising effect. My colleague, Councillor Sullivan from Hascombe, has already submitted some evidence which vividly supports my point. I would also reference a video which I understand is in evidence showing the volumes of traffic and congestion generated on local roads, which are already well over the capacity for which they were designed. This is borne out by evidence. See www.crashmap.co.uk, submitted of accidents on local roads, as well as evidence from Surrey County Council, which was submitted on the recent UCOG Loxley oil well appeal, of which we've heard a bit earlier on. The number of recorded incidents on the section of the B2130 between Barryhurst Lane and Pratt's Corner alone is 40 in the last decade. 9 of these were at the Stovolds Hill junction and a further 6 at the next right-angled bend 200 metres north at Painshill Farm. A fatal accident was recorded a further 600 metres west on the B2130 in 2014. And I believe untaxed vehicles emerging from Stovolds are routinely reported to the DVLA. Finally, the planning system ought to be fair and appropriate for all, whereby confidence is maintained in the system and where appropriate processes are invariably followed by all. By allowing the appeals at hand, local people have grave concerns about the parity of the system in situations where the scale of the local settled community is disproportionately unbalanced by significant and unplanned increases in the GTR community. This then has the knock-on effect of unauthorised development, which not only increases the GTR site size, but also leads to the unlawful destruction of wildlife and their habitats, which are a distinctive feature of our beautiful villages and the Surrey Hills more broadly. The relevant planning policy is clear. The overarching aim is to ensure fair and equal treatment for travellers in a way that facilitates the traditional and nomadic way of life of travellers while respecting the interests of the settled community. In my submission, that delicate balance has not been achieved in recent times in relation to Stovolds. In my respectful opinion, there is a clear pattern of behaviour in this area which involves scant regard for the law and regulations, resulting in intentional, unauthorised development, as well as a potential breakdown in social cohesion. I trust this inquiry will send a clear message that this is wholly unacceptable now and in the future, and so I would urge you to dismiss these appeals. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll just check if the advocates have any questions for you. Mr. Cottle, is there anything you'd like to ask Councillor Waterson?
Well, I suppose there is a question about the planning authority under enforcing lighting conditions that apply to the planning permissions, and whether your council has said to the authority, what are you doing about it?
Well, it's certainly an ongoing discussion with our local borough and county councillor. But again, we've heard earlier in this inquiry about the financial pressures on local councils. So although in theory, there is more that Waverley could be doing by way of enforcement, we have similar discussions about the Burnt Hill site, which is beyond the scope of this inquiry. I'm aware of that. And it's fair to say there's always room for improvement.
Another question that I had is where exactly in Dunsfield the newts were recorded as crossing the main road? And I just wondered if there's a map handy to show where that is. Mr. Ward had a large map, and my learned friend had a large map this morning in relation to.
We've got appendix 13, which is the map using the viewpoints.
I'm not aware of a specific map. What we have in evidence is the data from which is submitted to an organisation called Frog Life, and indeed to Waverley, of all the different categories, numbers.
Just wondered where it says trying to cross the main road, if you could just point that out.
Well, to the east of the main road, there are woods, and that's where the various invertebrates, well, the various reptiles live. They cross.
I understand, Mr. Ward. I'm just trying to find out where you're talking about. If you could just show me where.
Okay, well, it's great if you've got Grattan Chase, for example, on there.
Inspector, do we want to short circuit that by once again just putting a cross on the map? So, Mr. Waterson, do you want to come up and put a cross on this map and then?
Yeah, I would just say one thing. It is quite difficult because anecdotally, although the work of the Toad Patrol is focused very much on this passage I've talked about, you talk to villagers and they pop up everywhere in people's gardens all over the place. So I wouldn't like the inquiry to think that they were just limited to this particular area, but let's have a look at the map.
I think, Councillor, your statement refers to the main road through Dunsfold. Now, I don't know whether that's the same as Dunsfold Road or not. Yeah, it is.
Well, this is Dunsfold Common Road here, as far as I can make out. A lot of spectators. The newish development of Grattan Chase is about here, I would say. I'm just trying to get an idea of the scale. So, there. That's a development only a few years old, 40-something houses, often found in the roads going through that estate and in the woods to the north and the south there.
But when you're talking about the main road through Dunsfold, are you talking about this road down here?
Yeah, Dunsfold Common Road.
Right, not what we've been referring to Dunsfold Road, not that road.
The one that goes up.
Right. So you're concerned about crossing this road?
Yeah.
So I think that's all we need to know.
To get to the ponds
and it's called Dunsfold Common.
Common.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Is there anything else, Mr. Cottle?
Well, just Councillor, you understand that there are a number of issues that you've raised. For example, untaxed vehicles. That's not going to be a planning issue in this case. Do you understand that? We're not going to. There are a number of issues that you've raised. For example, like the number of untaxed vehicles is not a planning issue. It's a matter for other jurisdictions, isn't it?
Yes, I think it's merely another illustration of an attitude which is to ignore regulation. But the main issue here is ignoring planning regulations. Can I just add on the Great Crested Newt saga? If you look at the end column in the statistics produced by the Toad Patrol, it does often say exactly where they were found in drains, cycle paths. But I think I've given a general idea of where we're talking about, which I hope is helpful.
And those statistics you're referring to, are those the documents that were put in during the adjournment?
Yes.
Yeah, so we've got
Well,
those.
they were updated because they've been
Yes.
out in December, January,
But,
February.
we've got that document.
Yeah, you've got all that.
Okay. Mr. Cottle?
I think that's probably enough questions. I'm going to take up the issues of ecology with Mr. Sibbott.
Of course, I understand that, Mr. Cottle.
So no disrespect, but I'm going to put the questions to Mr. Sibbott.
Mr. Masters, have you anything for Councillor Watson?
Also, in your paragraph in your presentation, you make reference to, thank you, you make reference to allowing the appeals at hand, local people with grave concerns about the parity of the system in situations where the scale of a local settled community is disproportionately unbalanced by significant increase, you've got and unplanned increases in the PT community. Are you distinguishing between the sites that have been granted planning permission at Lydia Park by the council as being totally acceptable and sites that are, and these sites as not being?
No, I wasn't really trying to draw that distinction. And of course, Lydia Park is beyond my jurisdiction, as it were. But I think if you take all those developments as a whole, which I think I'm doing in this instance, there's this issue of dominance, but also a feeling that that new sites are set up without any reference to the planning system.
Okay, so it's a dominance point you're making, and you don't distinguish between sites lawfully passed by the council and these current sites that are trying to get planning permission.
No, I don't particularly, because in a sense we're outside both those areas. The sites that are subject to these appeals are outside Dunsfold, as indeed is Lydia Park.
Okay, I'll leave. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Okay. Return now to Mr. Smythe. And before you carry on, Mr. Lintott, can I just check whether you've been in a position to discuss the suggested conditions that were put in this morning?
Yep, I have discussed that with Mr. Smythe, and we will add a little bit on the end of the examination, just where I ask him to address and give you any comments on that.
Okay. Well, let's proceed on that basis then.
Thank you. So, Inspector, you'll remember that of the three issues we've dealt with 1 and 2, we've got planning conditions to go. And you'll remember that I split this topic into 3 areas: the inverted commas appropriate pipe solution, the basin solution, and infiltration. So the first topic, which I will ask the witness to address, is the appropriate pipe solution. And this comes out of, for your notes, Mr. Woods' evidence at 9.57, where he says that appropriate piping of the drainage ditch can be provided. Now, yeah, 9.57, Inspector. So, Mr. Smythe, can you just help us then with what your evidence demonstrates, starting please with the calculations that you've taken us to already at Appendix 11 of your proof, and explaining what your views are on whether what Mr. Woods says there is accurate.
Yes, if you recall, my Appendix 11, which we talked about in the earlier session, includes a calculation comparing pipe capacity with the capacity of a watercourse. And I'm showing within this that there's a reduction in flow capacity of 91%. Now, this is a dramatic loss in capacity, and the system will become overwhelmed as a result of this, which will result in flooding. So any pipe solution will involve loss of capacity of the watercourse and would increase flood risk elsewhere.
Now, you discuss in your rebuttal evidence at 2.35 the challenges of the site in terms of clay subsoil, groundwater flooding, high groundwater levels, the wide flood extent, all of those factors that you described there. What I'd like you to focus on is whether or not, given what you've talked about under issues 1 or 2 and the nature of the site, in your professional view, a technical drainage solution is possible for these sites, and explain what your view is in relation to what we've said already in terms of what's taken place and the site specifics.
Yeah, so under 2.3 in my rebuttal, I highlight that this is a complex drainage scenario. The scheme involves the removal and infilling of a watercourse, ground and level raising in an area of flooding that will displace floodwater other areas. But I also highlight, and I think it's flagged in the under report, there's an up to 25% risk of groundwater flooding in this location. There is also an increase in surrounding impermeable areas. There's also an increase in the impermeable area around and as part of the development sites. And I also note that the underlying ground conditions are clay. Clay is a cohesive, impermeable subsoil, and it doesn't accept an infiltration solution, i.e. the water doesn't sink into clay. A subsoil of sand or chalk would accept an infiltration type solution. A subsoil of clay doesn't.
So what if it was to be suggested to you, well, you've looked at a pipe of 300 millimeters, maybe there's another solution that could involve bigger pipes, some other means of doing it?
I have considered that, because obviously safe access and egress is quite fundamental and key to this development. But the equivalent kind of pipe would be significantly larger than the 300 pipe that's been installed. This larger pipe would stick out of the ground and it would be raised proud of the existing ground levels. I'd consider the need to protect this pipe from vehicular traffic. So, for example, a lorry travelling over the pipe, and to prevent that pipe from crushing, a further layer of access way construction would be provided on top of the pipe. So to me, that would present a solution that means localized level raising in and around any pipe crossing of the watercourse. And as we know from the statement and evidence I've given to date, any level raising within the area of flooding displaces flood water and therefore increases flood risk elsewhere. And without a full and proper assessment of this, I cannot see how safe access would be provided without increasing flood risk elsewhere.
Just on the size of pipe alone, Mr. Smart, from a theoretical point of view, what size of pipe are you talking about?
probably a 750 diameter, roughly. And I think in the estimations of the watercourse, I've allowed for a 600 deep watercourse, hence my statement that any culvert solution would be proud of the ground levels.
So just so that I understand that, then if you've got 600, you've got the 750 pipe, what would be the situation in terms of the additional
I'd say kind
infrastructure?
of, so if with an adopted sewer, for example, you allow 1.2 meters above the pipe. I think if you introduce some concrete protection, you can have 900 above the pipe. And in smaller kind of unadopted scenarios, I'd say you'd need at least 600 of road construction over a pipe to stop a wheel load from a vehicle from crushing it. And when I say a wheel load, I'll be talking about something associated with a lorry, so like a high-ab or a low loader, where I know that a wheel load is in the order of 6 or 7 tons. That would crush a pipe without adequate protection.
So moving on then, Inspector, to the next suggestion, second issue, which is a basin. You've provided us with calculations within your Appendix E of a basin. So can you just help us and talk us through those in respect of whether or not that helps?
Yes,
It is
that's the
indeed, yeah,
rebuttal.
because it's the rebuttal to Mr. Woods' evidence.
I think actually that's Appendix F. So I've undertaken a quick storage.
That's my, yeah, it's my mistake. Sorry, I can't read my handwriting. So it's Appendix F of the rebuttal.
It'd be right. I think it's the last one, so it's. It's at the very end of the document. If you're looking at it online, it's at the very.
Page 29. Well, 29 is where it starts, Inspector. Yeah.
So this is a quick storage assessment, and this considers all 4 sites as a single entity, and it deals with the attenuation storage that you would need to provide for solely those 4 sites. So that just to be, and then what I've done is I've calculated how big the basin would need to be. So in the order of 321 to 471 meters cubed. Yep, and the basin's been sized using green. I'm suggesting an allowance of 400 meters cubed should be allowed. And very, very crudely, considering a 1 meter deep basin, the space requirement is roughly equivalent to a single caravan plot. And as I said before, this is a drainage calculation only dealing with the rainfall that lands on the 4 appeal sites. It doesn't deal with any wider aspect or rainfall falling outside of these red lines. And it's worth noting that if a basin was to be provided of this size, it would need to be located outside the extent of any flooded area.
in terms of the area, I think you said that would be equivalent to a single caravan plot. Now,
Yeah.
by that, do you mean,
So I
do you
mean,
mean the actual area in which a caravan would stand
no,
or something
what I'm
else?
referring to is during the discussion on the sequential test, I was considering Mr. Woods's evidence in terms of the sequential test and the space requirement required for the development sites. And in Mr. Woods's evidence, he describes 500 metres squared as a spatial allowance for a caravan plot. So it's not just it's the area, parking and amenity around a caravan as well. So I'd note that the sites are relatively compact, so there's a small area to play with, and I struggle to see how a basin of that size could be located inside the red line boundaries of these sites.
Can I just ask you to pick up on the other point that you've made then? So let's assume that the pipe isn't possible for the reasons that you've suggested, and you need to provide a basin to deal with not just the surface water runoff from the sites, but to take us back to ground zero in respect of addressing everything that the stream corridor would address. What would be the scenario in that situation? Have you any idea what that might entail if a basin was suggested to deal with that?
No, I haven't calculated that because that is a major engineering exercise. But what I can say that is a major, more strategic pond provided for strategic flood relief along this corridor would be considerably bigger than the 500 metres squared, sorry, the 400 metres squared I mentioned earlier. And I cannot see how that could be located within the red line areas of these sites. And to size a larger basin or a flood compensation scheme on a strategic level, dealing with all the sites, a detailed hydraulic modelling exercise of the whole watercourse would need to be undertaken. This requires an assessment of the landform survey and would need much more space and land than is shown within the red line of these application areas.
So Inspector, unless I'm missing something, that takes us on to the final issue, which is Mr. Rowe's point about infiltration. This may explain my mistake in terms of appendices, because I see that you've got in your appendix E of your rebuttal evidence, you've got an appendix which deals with infiltration and geology information that you've submitted to deal with that within your rebuttal evidence. So can you just help me with this assertion that Mr. Rowe makes in his evidence that the existing drainage mechanism of infiltration may be of some assistance in respect of water runoff? Can you help us with what your response to that is, please?
Yeah, so I think on page 11 of Mr. Rowe's document, he suggests the existing drainage mechanism of infiltration is not significantly changed by the development. I refute that comment and note in my rebuttal, Appendix E, and within Appendix E, I've looked at the geological conditions in and around the area. And before I kind of run you through that, I would note that no geotechnical information has been provided as part of the application. No soakage testing has been provided. So to be able to advise yourself and the authority, I've gone to the British Geological Society, where there's a website that provides borehole records from historic borehole logs in and around the area. And what I did find, there was a borehole record down near the aerodrome, fairly close to the site, and that recorded stiff clay as the underlying ground condition. I then also found a publicly available borehole record on Hambleton Road.
Which road?
Hambleton Road. Again, fairly close to the site. This again showed clay as the underlying subsoil. So without any information as part of the application, I conclude that the subsoil for the site is clay. And the clay prevents water soaking in. So effectively, an infiltration solution is not viable, not shown to be viable on these sites.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smythe. Now, the final thing that we need to have a brief look at is the email that was sent through this morning at 09:56 from Peter Brownjohn. In respect of that, I want you to just put out of your mind the fact that your evidence is the sequential test hasn't been passed, and so permission should be refused on that basis, and also that the exception test can't be applied, so that permission should be refused on that basis, and also that the elements of the sequential test that are identified in 178 haven't been passed, and therefore permission should be refused on that basis. And just look at the conditions that have been provided and help the inspector from a flooding perspective with how you see those conditions and any difficulties that there would be in respect of, we've not been provided with any distinction between option 1, 2 and 3. So I'll ask you just to deal with those options sequentially, 1, 2 and 3, and just help the inspector insofar as you can with what you see there.
So I must say that flooding and flood risk, it's such a fundamental aspect of a development. That development has to be shown feasible and safe in terms of flood risk before it proceeds to agree conditions. So I wouldn't feel it appropriate that conditions be agreed without the fundamental viability of the site with respect to flood risk being demonstrated in the application information. And in the information before me, and in my proof, rebuttal and supplementary information, I cannot see how a viable scheme can be demonstrated.
And then with that being said, looking at condition option number 1, I note there that it says, it talks about a strategy. It says that the strategy shall confirm how surface water will be managed within the site to avoid increased flood risk to people or property. Can I ask you for your comment on to the inspector on the assumption made within that paragraph then?
I think this condition assumes that surface water can be safely managed on the site. And when I look at the flood information, I see a wide corridor of high-risk flooding all the way through these sites. And I cannot see in the shape and form of the current development how that could be provided without major redesign in terms of site area, layout, everything.
And then we can see that B would involve set out proposed measures describing permeable surfacing, etc. And C says include details again of how access and overland flow routes will be managed during heavy rainfalls. So again, can I have you comment on that and any assumptions within that paragraph?
Yeah, so as I mentioned a minute ago, any land raising or development at all within the flood corridor, which is shown in Appendix A, will increase flood risk elsewhere. So I cannot see how you can safely access and egress these sites in the information before me. So I can't see how it's viable.
Okay, so we move on to condition 2. We've got wording here saying the strategy shall demonstrate that, and then A, surface water will be managed to avoid increased flood risk to occupants or third parties. Again, just your comment on that, please.
I feel that the surface water corridor through here, the surface water strip of flooding is so extensive and shown worse than expected in those flood maps. I cannot see how it can be managed in the limited space within the application area.
What about B, that the strategy shall demonstrate reasonable steps have been taken, so reasonable steps have been taken to ensure safe access and egress during heavy rainfall events?
I think that is inappropriate. So it's not a reasonable step to have safe access and egress for these people. I think it's a fundamental requirement that safe access and egress is provided to these occupants.
And then C, strategy shall demonstrate that the layout and ground profiling incorporate appropriate measures to manage overland flow routes where possible. So I'd like your comment, please, on what
Again,
that condition says and whether it's appropriate if it's complied with, given what you've said already.
Yeah, I mean, again, we've got the strip of flooding running through and I'd be thinking about appeal site A. The flooding corridor, it's about half the site, and I think it's got a caravan sat on it. I cannot see how it could be, how that strip could be managed and development still be located on the site. I can't see how it's feasible.
What about all the sites in respect of having some sort of system to deal with appropriate measures to manage overland flow routes where possible? What does that say to you? If it's possible, what they're trying to do?
So to safely manage an overland flow route, that would impede access, safe access and egress to all these sites. And I can't see how it can be delivered in the information presented so far.
And insofar as what that might have for flooding being made worse outside of the site in respect of overland flow routes, is there any comment you've got on that?
Well, as I've said before, any level raising at all, any culverting, access works, or anything different to the original 2019 pre-development scenario will widen the flood risk corridor associated with these sites, increase the width of effectively the blue flooded corridor for which there should be no development inside of.
In respect of this, the last paragraph within condition 2, it says the strategy shall be based on the principles set out in the submitted flood risk assessments. Well, in respect of those principles, you gave evidence earlier that in respect of B to D, on page 29 of that under report, it notes that the water ditch.
Sounds like leading to me, sir.
No, I haven't asked a question yet, so wait till I ask the question.
Well, give me, you've got so far, it's clearly leading.
It's not, well, the inspector can tell me if I'm leading, but I haven't put a question yet. Yeah, exactly. So that the under report, what you said about the end of report, at paragraph 20, at page 29, about the need to keep the ditch free from any obstruction. What do you say about that in relation to principles set out in the flood risk assessments?
Yes, the under report takes reliance on the fact that this is an open and free flowing watercourse. This is not the situation associated with the development and the information presented. And it clearly increases. It just isn't the facts of what's in the report.
And then finally, then option 3, you've got the scheme shall limit surface water runoff rates to greenfield rates, or as otherwise agreed with the LLFA. So what about the imposition of something that shall do that?
Yeah, I mean, that is a requirement of policy, and within my estimation of the size of a basin, that is the approximate tool I've used to calculate the basin size. But that would only deal with rainfall and runoff from the 4 respective appeal sites. It doesn't deal with the wider issue of surface water flooding.
And the inspector has your comments already about associated issues relating to the basin. What about C? Demonstrate that surface water from hard standing areas will be managed on site and will not increase flood risk elsewhere.
As I've said, in the estimate of the basin sizing, it's an incredibly large basin relative to the plots of the sites. As I also talk about in my rebuttal, porous paving solutions. If the porous paving is located in an area that floods from surface water, the porous paving will be full of flood water and it won't be able to accept any rainfall on the development parcel.
What about then D, provide for safe overland exceedance routing?
Yeah, so D is defining the overland flood routing and the surface water corridor. I know that this is in excess of the corridor identified in Appendix A, and I cannot see how it would fit on the site.
All right, Inspector, I'm not going to deal with technical drafting issues or the fact they're listed prior to commencement of development or any of those things. I'm just restricting the topic to the practical issues from a flooding perspective on those conditions. But with that qualification, unless there's anything that I've missed, Inspector, thank you very much. Those are the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Questions?
Thank you, sir. Mr. Smythe, I suggest you move around.
I think I'll sit here. Yeah.
Because it will be most uncomfortable to you. And I don't particularly want to be addressing the rear because I think that would be very impolite. Take your time. Tell me when you're ready. Now, Mr. Smythe, you've been going for about 4 hours. Are you happy to continue, or would you like a short break?
I'm okay, actually.
Okay,
I'll probably need one in a while, but I'm okay to carry on.
okay. And I'll continue if that's okay.
Thanks for asking. Yep, ready.
Now, Mr. Smythe, I've never cross-examined you before, so could I start with, I'll ask you some questions. Usually it'll be a yes or no answer type required. That might not satisfy you because you may want to put a caveat into that, and I'll give you a chance to put a caveat into that. And I can tell you, if I interrupt too early, the inspector will tell me off. So, but if you could just answer us directly first, so that we've got your main answer, and then you can go on to your caveat. That will save an awful lot of time with me going over and repeating questions. If you can,
Noted.
if you can, okay. So can I just start off then by, let's go to, as a topic, the flood risk assessments, okay? And the mapping. So for the moment, can we pick up the flood risk assessment done by Flume? And as I say that, I put my Flume report, I've lost my Flume report, which is always annoying.
Sorry. Oh, yeah, there you go.
I had it. Now I can't find it. Give me a second. Oh, it's here in front of me. Okay. Now, let me start by going to Flume at page 8 of 16.
Page what? So 8 to
8 of 16.
8.
Sorry, if you don't hear me, just yell at me to shout up, and I'll do that as well.
Yep. Page
Okay.
8.
Right. As you've already said, Mr. Quigg relied on two things. I'll just read out what he says. Flume have obtained two different surface water flood risk pluvial models, one from the EA, that was the one that's been replaced by the 2019 data, and another proprietary flood model from UK flood maps 4. Now, I'm sure you are fully aware of UK flood maps, are you?
Yes, by
Right.
Royal Haskelley.
So you know that they describe their modelling as property level resolution, in other words, fit for analysis at property level.
Yeah, I've seen that in the report.
Yeah. And you also know that they update their model yearly. You've seen that in the report as well.
Yeah.
Okay. And we know that the data for that comes from LiDAR in 2023. And it's updated yearly.
Yeah, I refute that. So there hasn't been a national LiDAR survey.
Okay, if you say that's wrong, I'm just going to put.
No, I'd see 2013 is the date that Flume procured the flood floor map information from Mental.
Well, I'm going to beg to differ. I'm going to read out what is said in this report. Commercial data 2023 is based on more accurate LiDAR ground elevation data and flood flow than the 2013 model. That's what is put there by Mr. Quigg. Okay, and where have you refuted that in your evidence before? Can you take me to the passage where you've refuted what was said? You've analysed the FRA, but where in your evidence, anywhere, either in your proof of evidence, your rebuttal, or your supplemental? So you've had 3 chances. Can you point me where you've refuted that statement before?
I've refuted the accuracy and the reliance on that figure 8, I think it is, in chief earlier.
And I'm
where
not
I
asking you in
referenced-
chief here. I'm asking you where in your written evidence.
In my written evidence,
Okay,
I would have put that
you
in
make the
proof.
statement that that's wrong. It's based on the same 2013 LiDAR because that's not what Mr. Quigg says. So just take me to the written evidence where you say that. Because I put it to you, you don't.
I, in my proof, comment on,
You do, but not in the context that you've just said.
no. I do comment on this in my proof. I'm just going to find the reference.
Yeah, please do. Which proof are we looking at?
My proof of evidence,
The original one.
yeah. Where was it? I've got some commentary on the, here we go. So 5.72 onwards.
At page.
Here we go, 5.88. Yeah, so FRAA, which I'm referring to the Flume report there, has provided additional flood mapping referenced as UK Flood Map 4 via Arbormental 2023. It's in figure 4 and it shows low surface water flood risk.
Yep.
But I think it shows no flood risk for the 1 in 1,000.
No, that's right, it doesn't.
I know, but I note Mr. Quigg. Yeah, the
But
1 in
sorry,
1,000.
where in that paragraph does it say what you said in evidence today? But it's relying on the 2013 LiDAR, because Mr. Quigg makes it quite clear it doesn't. Because you don't say that at all, do you?
No, what I say is that it's proprietary commercially flood modelling service by
Yeah,
Royal
absolutely.
Haskell.
Sorry, I'm interrupting you. Forgive
Yeah.
me.
And that this service is used by insurance companies. And I myself use this
I know,
as
Miss-
part of what I do.
Mr. Quigg, you
And-
don't say, do you?
No,
But-
what I say is the terrain model that forms the basis of this modelling is unclear. And I cannot conclude whether this is pre or post development.
Mr. Quigg, can I just have an answer? You don't say anywhere there, and you've never said in any of your evidence up till now in your 3 reports, anything to contradict what Mr. Quigg says in the FRA. But it's not reliant on the 2013 LiDAR. Do you?
No, it wouldn't be. It would be reliant on the 2019.
Thank you. Well, you say the 2019, but you never said that before.
Because I know there has been no national LiDAR survey since
Well,
2019.
it doesn't matter. There have been private LiDAR surveys and companies use that as well. Okay?
So
And,
is that what's,
okay,
is that what's happened here?
no, because all I'm testing you for the moment on is the fact that what Mr. Quigg says, which is that it's data from 2023 and it's based on more accurate LiDAR elevation than used by the EA. And he specifically only refers to the 2013 because, of course, the 2019, the newer modelling wasn't out when he made his first report. Okay, and all I put to you is what you said a moment ago wasn't accurate. You've actually now changed it because you're now saying, first of all, you said it was reliant on 2013. Now you conceded it's reliant on 2019. So you changed your position, haven't you?
No, I'm referring to, so the old flood maps, as referenced in Mr. Quigg's report, would have been based on the LiDAR that was undertaken in 2013.
I'll go there once more, because that's not how we got into this, and I'll put it once and then I'll move on. We got into this because you said it was based on the 2013 LiDAR, and I pointed out you've
Where-
never,
where was
let me
that?
just finish, please, Mr. Smythe. I pointed out you'd never said that before, and then when you realised you'd never said that before, you said, no, it's based on 2019. So that's a change in your evidence today, isn't it? From what you said a moment, first of all, to what you're now saying. It's a change.
I'm unclear what elements.
Well, I'm sorry. The inspector understand. I'm going to ask the inspector to note you won't accept it's a change. And all you're saying it's unclear, and I'll make submissions on that at the end of the day as to your reliability on it. Do you understand? So I'm going to give you one last chance because it goes to your reliability. Do you accept you've changed your position?
I don't believe I've changed my position.
Okay. I'll leave it at that. You see, the whole point of what Mr. Quigg was saying is that his data was the most up to date, and he'd used the commercial data because, in fact, they rely on both LiDAR and modelling, so that as they publish them, says it can be, it's a property level resolution, so that it can be looked at property level. Okay, so, and the problem with the EA data is it's not to that resolution. And you now rely upon the 2019 data. And if we could pick up the EA guidance notes to that, please. But I helpfully underlined so that you'd know where I was going, and as was picked up by your counsel and took you there. Now we know that the EA data is put into a category, a confidence category is assigned to it, isn't it? And you work with this data all the time, so you know the limitations of
Yes.
it, don't you? Okay. And this explains what that category means, okay? And it basically means that it's not suitable for property level resolution or assessment. That's what it says, doesn't it?
It does say that.
Right.
So what the EA tell us as an industry is this highlights areas of flooding that generally need more further assessment.
Yes. And that was what Mr. Quigg was pointing out by relying upon the commercial UK flood map 4. Because that was at a greater resolution. Let's just read what it says. It says, ROF SW outputs are generally not suitable for property level assessment. That's right, isn't it?
That is in line with the EA.
Yeah. So can you tell me where in any of your evidence you point out that limitation? So the inspector understands that that's a significant limitation of the mapping.
That's presented in the Flume report.
Sorry, I didn't ask about the Flume report. I asked where in your evidence, because that's the mapping you rely upon. Let me just finish, please, and then you can put it in, and I'll give you plenty of time. I'd ask you just to ask the simple question of where in any of your evidence, your 3 proofs of evidence, first proof of evidence, rebuttal, and supplemental, you point out that limitation to a report you rely upon.
I don't, but what I do is in my supplemental evidence, I note that in land adjacent to figure 8, and this flood map 4 indicates, as drawn, pre or post development, that there is no flooding happening anywhere near this site for the 1 in 1,000 year event.
I'll just check what figure you're looking at, Mr.
I'm talking about figure 8 on page 11 of the Flume report. And in my supplemental evidence, in the photographs showing the flood event for the 1 in 1.67 year event, there is flooding in and around this area for a very frequent storm event, that being the 1 in 1 year. Whereas this information here shows no flooding in the whole area. So I cannot take confidence that the information provided in here accurately reflects what happens on site, because I have factual evidence showing flooding on this area.
Well, that's a really interesting explanation and caveat. Where's that in any of your evidence up till now?
The photographs.
No, where do you say there is limitations, but when you compare Flume's modelling and the EA's modelling, I say this in relation to why I have confidence in the EA modelling. Where do you say that anywhere in your evidence up till now?
I present that in the supplemental evidence.
Where?
I don't give a confidence level on it. I use the current, most up-to-date, and as quoted by the Environment Agency, the most advanced model yet of the surface water.
Well, we know that. We know
So we
you,
know that.
we know you used the 2019 EA data. But where do you say, because I've asked you this a number of times, one, the caveat the EA give in their guidance notes that it's not to be relied upon specifically for when you're looking at property level, and where do you explain why you've done that? You haven't
I
done it, have
don't
you?
talk about that. I
No.
provide the latest information.
Yeah, without any of the caveats and without an explanation as to why you prefer that to the
And I've explained to the
Sorry, let me
inspector-
just finish. Why you prefer that to UK Flood Map 4 produced by the flood risk assessments, which you know is a property level proprietary. So you're using a model that the guidance note says don't use at property level, and you're preferring that to the 2021 flood map produced by the FRA, which actually says it is appropriate at property level, and but you haven't given any explanation for doing so, have you?
No, I've provided the most accurate, up-to-date information as part of my supplemental evidence.
Well-
And I've recommended to the inspector that of the information available to reflect flooding, the most appropriate is the latest EA surface water flood maps.
Yes, I understand, but I'm not going to repeat it, sir. I think you've got the point. We dispute that that's the most accurate data for analysis at property level for the reasons set out in the FRA, and you haven't explained why that isn't the case. Let me remind you, going back to the EA guidance notes, what it says. The method used does not provide information relating to when the floodwater may be deep enough to start causing damage or disruption to homes, roads, or other infrastructure. Alongside depth information, additional information on properties, including floor levels, would be required to say with any confidence whether flooding of a certain depth would enter into property and cause damage. I mean, it's a pretty big caveat, isn't it?
Yes,
As to
so-
why you shouldn't use it.
So what I'm suggesting in my proof is that detailed hydraulic modelling is required to be able to fully understand that. So, Inspector, these EA surface water flood maps, they highlight areas of surface water flooding, and it says within this element that more analysis is needed to fully understand property level flooding in these areas.
Where do you say, I'll come back to it one last time, where do you draw the inspector in any of your evidence to that caveat and then explain why it's still more appropriate to rely upon that than it is on the model presented in the FRA by Mr. Quigg?
Well, in my evidence in proof, I say that this is so unclear, it cannot be taken as accurate.
I think
for
that's a
site.
no. You haven't done it, have you? You haven't actually, you've already said you haven't quoted the guidance notes and given the
I haven't
caveat.
quoted everything as on the EA website as part of my.
No, I'm not
references.
asking you about everything. I'm asking you about the specific limitations set out in the guidance notes to reliance upon the 2019 data in
Mr
terms of.
Masters, I think you said you do it one more time. So
I'll leave it, sir. Yeah,
move on, please.
I will, sir. I'm grateful to you. Can we just go back then to the FRA? Okay. Now, I don't think there's any dispute between any of the mappings, and I just want to see if we can do that. The site itself, there are three categories of surface water flooding: low risk, medium risk, and high risk. Mr. Smythe.
That's correct. Well,
Right.
there's 4 if you can count very low as well.
I stand corrected, thank you. I'd only gone to the 3 because that's what everybody's referred to,
Yeah.
but you're probably right, there is a very low. Okay, but for the purposes of all the mapping, okay, the sites, the residential parts of each site, not the road parts, are all in the low risk category, aren't they? Whichever mapping you take, we can go through the mapping.
On the latest flood information I produce in Appendix A of my supplemental, I'm not showing a layout of the development. I'm purely showing the red line areas. So
Yeah, but we've got it here. I've got your Appendix 3, and I've got your. No, because I'm not sure it is Appendix 3. I think it's and I don't want to be wrong. I've got Appendix 3, but let's go. If we go, it's here. It's I'm in the latest supplemental proof, and I'm in page 6. And I'm sorry, I've got a black and white copy. You probably got a red copy. Sorry, coloured copy. But that shows the surface water flooding. Okay. And the point I put to you is that we know that the road parts of Pills C and D across this, but and if you actually include the fact that those plots go all the way down to Stovolds Hill, okay, exclude for the moment the red line area that goes down to Stovolds Hill. All the residential parts are in low flood area, aren't they? Or surface water flooding.
Can I just check, Mr Masters, whether you're talking simply about sites C and D or more sites?
All sites, sir. Sorry, it's only because
B's not yours, is it?
no, and so it's only because
Are you talking about C, D, and A?
well,
I want to be clear because
no. So C, there's a distinction. Only site C and D show the red line extending to Stovolds Hill.
that's true. Yes.
Okay. So it's quite clear. So let's take it in stages. A and B sites are totally in the low category, aren't they?
no, they're in the high. So on page 6, the dark blue represents the high flood risk. And what I haven't shown there is the sighting of individual caravans, but I do note.
Could you pick up Appendix 3? Which I
Of
think
what
comes from
Appendix
your
3
evidence.
to what?
It comes from, I've taken it from your first proof.
Appendix 3 to Mr.
Yeah,
Smythe's first proof.
that's my understanding. Is this the latest?
Ah, yes.
Have you got it?
Yeah, so there's Appendix 3, so this is showing
Is
the
that the right
old-
one, Mr. Smythe?
Yeah,
so-
that's
So my mistake, Mr. Smythe, is that this shows the old mapping in 2013.
yeah. So this mapping,
So let's
which
take it.
was produced last year in 2023, uses the Environment Agency.
2013 data.
Yes,
Well-
and that
Sorry,
Environment
sir.
Agency data is based on the LiDAR from 2013.
Yeah. Okay, I get your point. Let's just deal with that first. So under the previous EA data, which is what was in existence at the time of the flood risk assessments, can I
Yes, that's
borrow
correct,
that
yeah.
and keep that? Okay. All the sites were at low risk, weren't they?
No,
Well, forgive me.
no, there's an area of B and C that had some flooding there, and then if you go up, the red line for B and C runs up to Stofolds Hill.
Yeah, and you say
you'll
because it
see
goes,
There's high risk flooding at the junction of the Lydia Park access track and the Stofolds Hill
Yeah.
adopted
I'll
highway.
just pause there, okay? Excluding the bit of the access track that runs all the way up to Stovolds Hill, the residential part of the sites were always in the low risk area, weren't they?
So ignoring the access,
Yeah,
so that ignoring the high risk at the junction and ignoring the spot of medium risk immediately south
yeah.
of D, then
In that,
everything else, if those bits are ignored, then everything else would be light blue on these out of date maps.
yes,
And indicate low
Yeah.
risk.
okay. And on the current situation, to be fair to you, what the mapping shows is that parts of plot A and the immediate front of plot B are now classified in the higher risk.
Yes, it's all presented there, yeah.
Yeah.
So
But the residential parts of plot C and D are not in the high risk at all, are they? Or even the low risk? They're completely out of the risk area.
if you look at the plan there and the bit that's labelled, and there's a bit of text there written, appeal site C and appeal site D.
Yeah.
Those bits of text are in areas that don't show any blue.
Yeah.
So they're
Yeah.
outside the flooded area.
Yeah. So
If one ignores the access and the junction of Stofolds Hill,
yeah,
which are part of the red line and do show high risk.
so ironically, what we have is that the later LiDAR evidence, although it shows some sites in a higher risk of surface water flooding, it's actually not, the surface water flooding area doesn't extend so far and excludes entirely the residential parts of C and D.
Yeah, but I'd just like to take yourself, or the inspector.
Could you just answer that yes or no before we take you take me anywhere? And just so that we
That question's already been answered. We've already been there.
yes, or okay. I think it was a yes. I know, so you've got it. I
So
just wanted
if I
to say it
take you
again.
to page 27 of my proof, and what it says is that there's a second bullet there. So it says on page 27, some developments include different elements of vulnerability, and the highest vulnerability category should be used unless the development is split into its component parts. So what that's telling me is if there's a red line box for a development and any element of that is highly vulnerable, this PPG tells me to address the whole of the red line as highly vulnerable.
Well, we'll come to this position about what you say is highly vulnerable in a moment, if I may, because that relates on your assessment that we're somehow in flood zone 3B, and that this site is because perhaps I can just ask you this in terms of flooding. Where these sites remain today in flood zone 1, don't they?
With respect to river flooding,
Fluvial flooding, yeah. Every other source of flooding except surface water flooding are in flood zone 1, aren't they?
it's flood zone 1.
Oh,
Yes.
and that's a fact you can't get round, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I put
Yeah.
that in the
Okay.
draft.
Yeah,
Common
absolutely.
Ground.
And so therefore, and the PPG tells you that if we're in flood zone 1, but because we're caravans, we might be regarded as highly vulnerable, okay? We don't have.
No,
to-
it's
Let me
not-
just finish, please. Okay, the PPG tells you if we're in flood zone 1, okay, and then you look at the PPG in terms of categories, there's no ramifications of that, because effectively we only start getting into concerns about all sorts of things like sequential and exception tests if we're in flood zone 2 and 3. That's what the PPG says, doesn't it?
No, I'd just like to advise Inspector that regarding the vulnerability of caravans, it's Annex 3 of the MPPF that categorises caravans in terms of vulnerability.
It is,
And it clearly says.
but you're looking at the PPG as well, aren't you?
Yes,
We'll come
and-
back in a moment. The PPG says that there are no implications if you're in flood zone 1 to that.
No, that would be incorrect. So the PPG says that all forms of flooding, in fact, it's not just PPG, it's the MPPF, which was just updated in December, says that all forms of flooding need to be considered.
Absolutely.
And then in paragraph 20, which I've got on 24, page 24 of my proof, other forms of flooding need to be treated consistently with river and tidal flooding in mapping probability and assessing vulnerability.
Yeah, well, I hear what you say, but
And-
could you
and the-
answer the question,
And the
please?
only tool within the PPG to assess probability and vulnerability is table 2, which we've just talked through this afternoon. So table 2, which I've got
Could we go to your,
on
sorry,
page 26
you're not
there.
answering the question. Let's see if we can go to paragraph, your page 26.
Yes, that's where I was just taking,
Okay.
Inspector.
So
So
this is the PPG table. Okay, it's the one we use. It's also, by the way, in the technical guidance that was published. And it's been the one that we use all the time. And we go there to see that anything in flood zone 1, whether it's highly vulnerable or more vulnerable, the box is ticked, so you don't need to go to sequential or exception tests. You certainly don't equate flood zone 1 with flood zone 3B.
no, the table there is
Could you answer the question?
the table there
could you
is
just answer-
presented.
Could you answer the question first? Clearly, that doesn't require, that table shows you don't need to do a sequential or exceptions
No,
test in
that-
flood zone 1. Is
that
that right?
table presents
Could you answer
the
the question?
method of dealing with.
Mr. Masters, Mr. Smythe is answering the question.
Yes, okay, sir.
So this table 2, this provides a risk matrix between the vulnerability, as I said, across the top, and the flood zones across the side. So it starts with zone 1, it ends in zone 3B. The PPG clearly in paragraph 23 says you've got to consider all forms of flooding and treat them consistently with the method for river and tidal flood mapping for probability and vulnerability. So this table 2 shows us how to do it, and the PPG tells us that other forms of flooding need to be treated in the same fashion as this. And that's why I akin flood zone 3B to a high probability of surface water flooding, which for clarity is represented by the 1 in 30 rainfall event frequency.
I'll try it a different way. Could we go to your original proof of evidence?
Yep.
Your page 2.5. 2.5 of the original proof of evidence, okay? Now, this is your case, isn't it? What set out at 2.5. The development does not adequately address the need for a sequential test, which must, underlined, be undertaken for this highly vulnerable development in accordance with National Planning Policy Framework and its supporting technical planning practice guidance. So your cases, so I understand it, is that it's the duty of the applicants to demonstrate that they pass the sequential and exceptions test when it comes to surface water drainage. Yes or no?
Yes, it is the applicant's.
Thank
duty.
you. Thank you.
And
So that they must positively, sorry, I interrupted you, carry on.
and I would make the inspector aware that the context of the proof of evidence was written in the context of the refusal notice, and also the fact that at the time, no sequential test had been provided as part of the application. There was a later rebuttal from Mr. Woods where a sequential test was provided only for sites A and B.
See, as a matter of fundamental fact, that's wrong in law, isn't it? You know that now because you've got the substation case and you know what that says. Or do you dispute that?
Yes, and I spoke about that earlier. So the substation case from January.
Yeah.
So that was against the context of an older, now out of date MPPF.
So is that the way you're putting? You're saying that it's no longer good law because it's interpreting an older
Yes,
MPPF.
and I think-
the MP. Sorry, let me just
I
finish.
think I made that point earlier
Well,
at the
did you?
start.
So let's just take it in stages. Let's look at that case, shall we?
We can
Right.
do, but
Let's look at paragraph 33 of that case to start with. Okay. Now this was a Court of Appeal case, so it's a pretty high authority, Mr. Smythe. And if your counsel and you are trying to seek to distinguish whether or not it applies now, because
Well, not only we're trying to, he specifically did in his first thing.
Forgive me if you want to interrupt me. I'll stop. You can say and you can make whatever submissions you want to now, as long as the inspector lets you.
so I did start my chief with clarifying this point because I operate in this industry. This substation action caused an awful lot of confusion in its application of the sequential test. And over the course of last year, between January and December, there was a lack of clarity in the industry. And what I did say in my chief, that this lack of clarity was addressed when government updated the MPPF, and they've specifically added in paragraph 175. And that 175 paragraph clearly outlines how to address the sequential test. And the confusion that occurred at the time of the substation action, and to be clear, that confusion was about the reference to the sequential approach alongside the sequential test. That sentence was removed in this latest update of the MPPF.
Well, let's explore that. That's helpful. But I'm going to go back for a moment to paragraph 33. So we can
Mr. Masters, in terms of looking at a judgment, I just wonder if this is more appropriate for submissions from.
Well,
both
I'm
advocates.
sorry, sir, but this is the witness's own evidence. He's gone into this judgment at depth, and I'm entitled to cross-examine him on that.
Well, he's gone into it because I think you've.
No. You went. But my learned
sorry,
friend
Mr. Cox,
made a whole
yeah.
speech that they'd gone into in chief. A few moments ago, perhaps you weren't listening. Sorry, I'm not being impolite, but he made the speech. He's opened this up.
Need to be
To
careful,
go
Mr.
into
Masters.
it. Yeah, that's why I've apologised, sir. But he made a whole speech about the fact they'd gone into this in evidence, so I'm entitled to cross-examine it, and I must be allowed to do that. So could we look at paragraph 33, please, and see how the judge noted that the way the arguments were put, and it wasn't just about the MPPF wording; it was also about the PPG. And what the judge said, it is and let's look at paragraphs 64 and 65, which the court adopted and accepted were correct. It appears the framework of the PPG requires surface water flooding to be taken into account when considering location of development as part of the sequential approach. Beyond that, there is no further direction as to exactly how surface water flooding is to be factored into the sequential approach. Policy and guidance is not prescriptive in that regard. Therefore, it will be a matter for judgment for the applicant and the decision maker as to how to give effect to the policy appropriately in the particular circumstances of the case. Now, I put to you that nowhere in the NPPF's newer version, and we'll go to it in a moment, do they prescribe in respect of service water flooding, how that exercise is undertaken. In fact, the wording is almost the same with some differences to the original wording. Would you like to answer that? And then I'll go on to paragraph 65.
So, sorry, the wording of what from the MPPF?
I'll say it again.
I think you were quoting the PPG or the MPPF.
I was. Policy and
what-
guidance is not prescriptive in this regard, and I suggest to you that it's still not prescriptive in that regard as to how it's to be done.
Yes, so that, and I've said that this decision, which I note was from, in the context of the MPPF as issued 2 historic issues ago. So I think the July 21, it was confusing, and industry has sought to clarify that by adding in the new MPPF clause or paragraph 175, which clearly tells us how to undertake the sequential test.
Well, let's look at that. You want to go to 175? Because 175 says this: the sequential test should be used in areas known to be at risk now or in the future from any form of flooding, except in situations where a site-specific flood risk assessment demonstrates no built development within the site boundary includes access to escape routes, land raised. When it goes on to applications for some minor development and changes of use, then we got a footnote. This includes house builders development, small residential extensions and changes of use as a caravan, camping or chalet park.
I think you missed out except.
Yes, I did. Sorry, except, yeah, homes where the sequential test should be applied as appropriate. Yep. Well, sorry, sir, it's my fault. I didn't do it on purpose. Where the sequential and exception test should be applied as appropriate. And so the wording there is as appropriate. And I'm putting to you, that means.
But I think that footnote,
let me just finish, please.
that footnote's against 176,
let me just-
not 175.
Let me just finish, please. Footnote's quite clear. Okay, and we're looking at changes of use and non-engineering operations. The footnote makes it quite clear that the judgment, we say, and the distinction in the judgment, the recent January judgment, still applies. And I wonder if you could help me about this. When did the MPPF come out?
The latest one came out in December.
Yeah. Do you know the date of this judgment? January.
Yeah, it was 2021.
The judgment is from January last year, 2024
Oh.
last year.
2024. Yeah, sorry. Sorry, I was talking about the reference in paragraph 8 to July 21.
Yes.
But yes, and
Sorry.
this is why I said at the start that there was confusion in the industry from January to December last year
Yes.
until this new MPPF
Yeah.
was updated.
But the reference to as appropriate, okay, quite clearly,
Are we talking about footnote
yeah,
62?
yeah. You see, I will be putting it to the inspector, but the law takes precedence over interpretation of policy, and that's a standard legal concept. And so he must take interpretation of policy from this. And we clearly know that the law came out at a time when this new policy, when this new section was in place,
So I would note that
as you've already pointed out.
the
So
comment on as appropriate is regarding footnote 62. Is that correct?
it's regarding this use, which is a change of use of land. Do you know the distinction between the change of use of land and other operations and engineering operations?
Yes. So
Do you have planning qualifications?
no, I'm a
We're not
chartered
going through that.
engineer.
Mr. Smythe's been introduced in inquiry.
It's important, sir, because
No, it's in his proof. We're not going there.
not going where?
His qualifications are clearly set out. He's
Yeah,
already
I'm
dealt with them.
asking him whether he has any planning qualifications. It's a perfectly proper question. You don't, do you?
I'm an engineer.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So we'll come back to that in a moment. Okay. So what I'm putting to you is that the law as it exists at the moment in its interpretation of policy it interpretates the policy in a way, accepting as indeed this case authority did, because it was very similar wording in the old version, which you quote in your evidence, because you rely upon the old PPG, paragraph 167, isn't it? I think you quote it as well. Yes, you do. It's page 17.
A part of which document?
Yeah, it's your document. I'm looking at your proof. All plans should apply. This is paragraph 4.6.
Sorry, 4.6.
Yeah, with your paragraph, page 17. It says all plans should apply a sequential risk-based approach to the location of development, taking into account all sources of flood risk and the current and future impacts on climate change. So that paragraph, no change, because it also said the sequential test should be applied to all sources of flood risk. But of course, the court interpreted that as not being correct because it had to be read in the light of the PPG and other guidance.
Yes, but obviously
And
that.
let me just finish, please, and came to the conclusion, but it didn't mean that a person was obliged to prove the test. What it meant was that the decision maker had to take a sequential approach to the evidence.
Mr. Masters, I don't think that was a question. That was just a statement. Can you put, I've asked other persons
No,
at the
I can,
inquiry
sir.
to put things in the form of a question. Can you do so as well?
Yeah, sorry, sir. I thought we'd what I was doing, but I'll do it again. Our cases. I understand your cases. Your cases, in some way, the new NPPF wording has changed the wording to sessionally extend, but you can no longer rely upon the judgment. And what I put to you is, in fact, the wording of 167 also required the
Masters,
sequential.
can you get to a question?
Yes, I am, sir. Also required, in similar vein, the sequential test applied. But the distinction in the judgment was that the judgment said that didn't apply in a service water flooding situation because you had to interpret the policy with the PPG and with the table.
That's
Yes.
still not a question. That's a statement again.
Oh, I'm
Can
sorry.
you move on?
Uh,
You've had two chances to put the question.
Oh.
You haven't taken it.
Sorry, sir. I think that's a perfectly proper question, but I'll put it again in a different way. What I'm suggesting, I'm entitled to put my case and ask. Yeah, well, I put my case twice, but that was our position. Yeah, about our case, and I've asked this witness to comment on our case. I'm going to do it once more because. I'll do it again. The statement I put to you about our position, would you like to comment on it?
I think the comment is that paragraph 167 that you've just spoken about
Yes?
is out of date and superseded. The other comment I've got to make is your reference to footnote 62 and change of use. That is only applicable to householder development, non-residential extensions, and it excludes anything relevant to caravans. So
I'll try once more, if I can. Okay, our cases, but
No,
our
Mr. Masters, no, this time. That's it. You've had your extra opportunity. I've noted the question. I've noted the answer.
Okay, so I'll pause. What you say in your evidence, and you've made it quite clear, is that your criticism is that the sequential test hasn't been proved by Mr. Woods and the applicants. That's your position, isn't it? We've already covered that. If the inspector finds and accepts that the case law is such that in fact, in relation to service water drainage, but the decision is one for him based on the evidence, and that'll be a matter for him, won't it?
The planning inspector gets to decide the outcome of this, yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry. But if he decides, it's not a question whether or not Mr. Woods needs to prove it. If there's sufficient evidence to show that the sequential test has been passed, that's sufficient.
If the sequential test is deemed to have been passed, then the exception test could be considered.
Well,
So my information deals with the engineering elements of the sequential test. So a comment on the technical aspects with respect to flooding of each site, and I make comment on which sites might be more preferential in terms of lower flood risk than other sites.
forgive me, I'm going to, let's go back to the well-known table on when sequential and exception tests are required. This is flood zone 1. It doesn't change from being flood zone 1. And nowhere in the table of planning policy guidance does it require the exception test to be passed in flood zone 1, does it?
No.
Okay, and where in the PPG or the planning guidance does it say, but in flood zone 1, where it's surface water drainage, you have to consider the exception test. You have to, I'll put it a different way, but we have to prove the exception test has been passed.
Yeah, I mean, for development to be permitted, you have to demonstrate, firstly, that you can apply the exception tests. I don't think you can based on this information. And then you have to specifically answer the questions associated.
Where does it say that? Where do you get from?
So I think it's in the MPPF, it says you can only, and I do also note that your information presented by Mr. Woods's rebuttal considers a sequential test for these sites. It then proceeds to assume that it's passed the sequential test and then applies the exception test to this area
Could you answer the
where
question?
there is surface water flooding.
Could you answer the question, Mr. Smythe? Where does it say that? Can I help you? Because I
So
don't want to be
what's the
accused. Let's
question?
just go to paragraph 177 of the MPPF. And you'll see in the last paragraph, which you haven't quoted anywhere in your evidence, the need for exception tests will depend on the potential vulnerability of the site and of the development proposed in line with flood vulnerability classification set out in Annex 3, which comes back, if I may say so, to vulnerability, but then how you, you have to go to the table. And if we just read what the table says at your 4.26, flood risk vulnerability classifications.
Sorry,
Your page 26.
20. Yes. So the
Okay.
table 2, the one that we
Yeah.
keep
So
going back
in
to.
line with the classifications, so we go to the table to tell us whether or not the exception test needs to be applied, and it doesn't need to be applied where you're in fluvial flooding, flood zone 1. Okay, that's what it says. Yes.
It says, yes.
Thank you.
Flood zone 1, if you read across on the first row, it says flood zone 1, you look across, it says highly vulnerable, there's a tick in the box.
Yes, but we're not highly vulnerable because we're in flood zone 1, and if you go across anything,
We
in
are
flood-
highly
forgive
vulnerable
me,
because Annex 3
yeah,
tells us
and
so.
if you go across, the tick in the box says you don't need to have an exception test. You only have that in flood zones 2 and onwards. So please tell me, since paragraph 177 directs you to the flood vulnerability table, and the table tells you it doesn't apply, where else and what other policy you say you rely upon for it to apply?
So as I stated, the zones 1, 2, 3A and 4 are defined in the next page 27, where we know that it's 1 in 1,000, 1 in 100, 1 in 30.
It's in flood zone 1. We know that. That's been something you've conceded right from the beginning.
It is in flood
Right.
zone.
So forgive me, answer the question. We know from this table and applying 177, it doesn't apply. So please tell me on what policy, listen to the question. Where in policy terms do you get something that says it does apply to surface water drainage? Because it doesn't, because
Paragraph
this table
23.
doesn't,
Paragraph 23.
this table doesn't relate to surface water drainage. It only relates to fluvial flooding.
I feel like I'm repeating myself. So it is noted, and it says in the notes for table 1, this table doesn't show the application of the sequential test, which should be applied first to guide development to the lowest flood risk areas, nor does it reflect the need to avoid flood risk from other sources other than river.
No, but you interpret it by
No,
reference. Forgive me, you interpret it
Mr.
by.
Masters, you're interrupting the
Okay,
answer.
so I'll stop.
And
So-
Mr. Smythe has already been here as well. But say,
I referred previously to paragraph 23, the last sentence of the policy planning guidance, which says other forms of flooding need to be treated consistently with river and tidal flooding in mapping probability and assessing vulnerability. And as I've said before, the only tool in the whole of the PPG to assess probability and vulnerability is table 2. And paragraph 23 tells us that all forms of flooding must be treated consistently with river flooding, noting my previous explanation of read
Mr.
across
Smythe, do you know
between
what-
zones 1 to 3. So that's where it tells us this table.
Do you know what consistently means? Is you look at how it's treated under river and flooding, and you apply the same process. And we go to table 2. The way that it's treated is you don't need to apply the exceptions test. And so, are you saying it should be treated inconsistently with that table?
No, I'm saying that this site has a high risk of flooding.
Forgive me. Are you?
And if
Could
we
you
were
answer the
looking at-
question first? Did you give the?
So-
Oh, sorry, he didn't.
And on this table 3, it tells us when we can use the exception test and when it's appropriate, and when the vulnerability or the risk levels are considered too extreme that you can't apply the exception test. And as I've said before, when probability levels are zone 3B or equivalent to zone 3B, this table suggests that development should not be permitted.
You're
and
just
I
inventing
note-
your own interpretation, Mr. Smythe. Could you answer the question? Okay. Are you saying to the inspector that where this table says zone 1, no exceptions to it test, he should not rely upon that, but say, in fact, no matter what, it's in flood zone 3B, based on your say so?
Sorry, can
Yeah.
you repeat the question? It's very
Well,
similar
it's
to
pretty simple.
the answer.
You've already said it should be treated consistently with this table. And this table says the way you treat it is you don't, because it's in flood zone 1. And then you've referred to flood zone 3B as your interpretation of where we're at. So are you saying the inspector can actually ignore the fact that we're in flood zone 1 and treat this site as in flood zone 3B for the purposes of your analysis?
So paragraph 23 clearly says that you've got to consider all the other forms of flooding alongside river and tidal, and that table shows us river and tidal. So it's telling we've got to consider all types of flooding. We can't just ignore
You've said that.
surface water flooding.
You've said that. Could you
or
answer?
any other flooding. So
Could you answer the question?
you've got to
I'm
apply-
putting to
Mr.
you.
Masters, this is the answer, which we've had before. I'll allow it one more time and then we move on.
Okay, thank you, sir. What I'm putting to you is treating. Okay,
No, it's clear. This is the matrix where you assess probability against vulnerability. This site is highly vulnerable
Mr.
and
Smythe,
it's at high risk, and it's equivalent to the cross at the very bottom of the highly vulnerable column, which to me clearly says development should not be permitted
Mr.
where
Smythe,
risk levels are that high.
Mr. Smythe, what I'll be telling the inspector is that consistently with this table means that the exception test doesn't apply. In fact, to be quite honest, neither does the sequential test apply. But I will be saying to the inspector, it'll be a matter of judgment for him whether or not he takes into account the sequential approach to this site, and also whether he takes into account as a matter of planning judgment whether or not this site causes flood risk elsewhere, but not on the basis that this is a test we have to approve, but as part of his planning judgment. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, of course you can ask the inspector that.
Okay, and that's the way I say this site is limited. So I say that
Mr. Masters, is this a convenient point? For
it is, sir. I'm grateful. I'm really sorry, sir, that we've clashed. I think that these are important points, both of law and of planning. So I think I was right to persevere with them. But it is a good.
It's not a question of perseverance, Mr. Masters. It's a question of how it's done.
I understand. I understand.
And exchanges should be dealt with in a courteous manner by all parties. But with that, I'll take the adjournment. 10 minutes, back at 4:10, please.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Did he say 5 past? Did he say 5 past? Stephen? Stephen? Did the inspector say 5? Yes. 10 past, sorry. Thanks. Thank you, sir. Right, it's 10 past and everybody's back here. Mr. Mustard, before I invite you to continue with your questions, could you just give me an update on timing? And I think you said initially, was it 2 hours initially?
It is, so I think I've only been about an hour, have I?
Probably something, that sounds about right to me.
So I'm hoping another hour.
Right, that's, I really need to draw things to a close around about 5 o'clock.
I'll try and finish by then.
So if you could, that would be,
Yeah,
very helpful.
I understand the pressures
Yeah.
of time, but it depends. Yeah, I'll
I
try my
understand that
best.
as well, yeah.
So we could pick up your, because it's convenient, your supplemental proof of evidence, page 6, and I'm going to go back to a question that you conceded already. So help us and don't do it. Remember, I asked you about the residential parts of site C and D not now being within the category of a service water drainage. And you said they were. We both concede that the roadways and stuff are actually in there. So can I just go So if you turn over the page, you've got the figure showing where the sites are, but over the page is actually the mapping, which again shows where the sites are. So the position is that in relation to sites C and D, the only parts of those sites that are in the high category is where the access track gets to Stovolds Hill. I'm in your page 7, Mr. Smythe. Sorry, I hadn't realised you weren't following me.
Page 7's the out-of-date mapping.
Is it? Okay, well then let's stick with
Should we be
page
using
6.
page 6?
Yep. Because same point, it's the only part of it that's in the high risk of flooding is where it meets Stovolds Hill. That's right, isn't it?
So these plans don't show the actual caravan positions. And I think the answer I gave earlier, I drew everyone's attention to page 27 of my proof. And the bullet point on that page, taken from the PPG, says some developments may contain different elements of vulnerability, and the highest vulnerability category should be used unless the development is considered in its component parts. So at the moment, the red line, I would have to consider the whole of the red line when making comments on vulnerability and say that the site in its entirety should be taken as
understand.
highly vulnerable.
I understand. I understand your position. That's your caveat. But could you just answer the question? The only part.
Could you show me a plan of where the caravans are?
Yes, if we look at, I can tell you now. If you look at the plan you've already got in 3.7, okay, you'll see that the caravans are within the enclosed areas which are outside the flood risk.
Yeah, so the box, and I put some text in there, appeal site C and appeal site D. Those boxes or rectangles, I do note that they're in areas outside of the high, medium, and low risk of flooding.
Yeah, so it's
the boxes only, but I note the access areas are.
so the only parts, if you could just answer this question, please. The only parts that are inside the high risk category is by Stovolds Hill, where the access track meets it.
No, that's the second area that's got high risk. The first area would be the area of access way between the Lydia Park access track and the position of the caravans, which is where we talked about where we've written appeal
Okay.
site.
Okay.
So it's got 2 locations where there's high risk of flooding.
Okay. Can we concentrate on the area by Stovolds Hill for the moment? Because there's a reference, I'll take you to your rebuttal at page 2.2, paragraph 2.2, where you say this: the point of access for the sites are noted as areas under high risk of surface water flooding, and safe access must be considered as part of the application to ensure the highly vulnerable development is not isolated from emergency responses operating during a flood event. So what
What section was that, sorry?
2.2 of your rebuttal. So what I take that to mean is that what you're saying is that these sites are unsuitable because of the high risk category on Stovolds Hill and emergency services not being able to attend because they'll be going through the surface water flooding on Stovolds Hill.
Yeah, so what I'm saying here is that safe access and egress has not been demonstrated to these sites as part of the application
Yeah,
information.
so can I put it a different way? Are you saying, okay, these sites in your professional judgment are unsuitable and plan permission shouldn't be granted because of the problems with the access at Stovolds Hill?
It's twofold. So there's the access provision between the access track and the place where the caravans are, the pitches maybe should call it. So there's high risk flooding there, and there's also high risk flooding at Stofolds Hill.
Yeah, so could you answer the question? Are you saying that because of a high risk flooding, even if we ignore a high risk flooding along the lane, okay, it would still be unsuitable? If there's some way of eliminating that, it would still be unsuitable because of a high risk flooding at Stovolds Hill, that this site would be unsuitable and unacceptable.
Well, if safe access cannot be demonstrated, then the site could not be shown to be suitable.
So you are saying that because of high risk flooding at Stovolds Hill, the site is unacceptable. Is that your evidence?
So the evidence shows actually that safe access isn't demonstrated as part of the application information.
So you would recommend refusal from a safety and engineering
So
point of
from
view?
a safe access point of view, I would recommend refusal based on the 2 locations of high risk shown on those applications.
Can you help me about this? Were you consulted and did you object to the planning applications for the Lydia Park sites that were approved? Was there any objection on flooding for them due to their access coming off the same the Stovolds Hill route?
I was not personally.
No. Had you been consulted, it's consistent with your evidence today that you would recommend refusal, wouldn't you?
I would need to see evidence of safe access as
Yeah,
part
so-
of those applications,
so-
and I haven't looked at those applications.
No? Okay.
So I can't
I'll-
provide
I'll-
further comment.
I'll leave it there. Thank you. And have you looked into those applications and issues and whether any issues arose on flooding in relation to them?
No, I haven't. Yeah, the scope of my work has been appeal sites A, B, C, and D.
And did the council ever say to you at any stage, well, actually, we had no issue with flooding, surface water flooding for those sites, even though they access Stovolds Hill, at any stage when they instructed
Now,
you?
as I said, I haven't had discussions on that, on other application or appeal sites. Just the scope of my involvement and input is limited to A, B, C, and D.
Yes, thank you. Now we go back to the Flume FRA. Which of course we've already canvassed,
There we go.
relied upon the UK flood map 4.
Yes, I've recommended to the inspector that flood map 4 is not appropriate for the reasons I said.
Yeah, I'm not
earlier.
going to go back over that. But there's a distinction, there's a dispute between us. The inspector's heard that. Let's look at page 9 of 16, because you criticise this for not referring to depths, but it does, doesn't it? Figure 6, let me just finish, refers to the depth of 150 millimetres, in other words, about 6 inches.
So I do make comment on that in my proof of evidence. So
Today in your evidence, you said it didn't refer to any depths, but it does refer to a depth, doesn't it? Of 150 millimetres, about 6 inches.
if I just go to my proof. Right. So this is figure 6. Page 9. Yeah, so what I say in this is that, so I'm in section 5.81, my proof of evidence. So in my proof, I've considered these FRAs. And from 5.8 onwards, I note that this drawing is titled Environment Agency Risk from Surface Water Flood Map, 1 in 1,000 year flood return, less than 150 mil depth. But what I draw attention to in 5.8, that I don't believe this is a full and informative plan, because this mapping does not show the extent of surface water flood risk with medium risk depths. So flooding above 150 millimeters. And what I do is in Appendix 3 of my information, I also review the depth information associated with Appeal Site A. Oh no, I think it's Appendix 10 actually. Yeah, so Appendix 10 is different depths. And as I've shown in that appendix, oh no, sorry, it's of my proof, I think it's Appendix 11. Oh, it must be 12 then. Sorry, I haven't labelled that.
Sorry, Mr. Smythe, I've given you a long time to guess. Could you just answer the question?
Yeah, so,
Again, forgive me, no, please just answer the question.
and what was the question?
Tom Quigg has said that the surface water flooding is going to be a maximum of 6 inches, 150. Where do you comment in your evidence on that statement?
I dispute that.
Where do you comment on that statement in your evidence?
I say the mapping does not show the extent of surface water flood risk.
So where do you actually refer to 150 millimetres? And
No,
what is-
Mr. Quigg's drawing refers to 150 millimetres.
Yes, because that's
I
what
would like to draw in the
that's what he
specs.
relies upon. And where do you say that is incorrect?
Yeah, so
Having
in
referred-
5.8,
Having referred,
so in 5.84, I say the commentary around figure 6 states that there's no flooding over 150 mil. However, I don't see this as a valid conclusion, as the mapping, as I've produced in Appendix 12, shows flooding 150 mil to 300 mil deep. And then I've drawn the inspector's attention to Appendix 12 of my report. And what appears to be missing from Mr. Quigg's information is the pale blue hatch through the middle of Appeal Site A, which is labelled as flooding of depths between 0.15 of a metre and 0.3 of a metre. So what I'm saying there is I don't agree with this plan because it doesn't show the 150 mil to 300 mil flood depth. It seems to have been misprinted or omitted. It doesn't give a clear picture, whereas my information shows that there's deeper.
in chief, which is why we've got here. In chief, you said there was no calculation of flood depth in the FRA, and there is quite clearly. What you now say, you disagree with that calculation, but your disagreement is based on the new mapping by the EA, isn't it?
I think there's 2 points here. So the first point is,
Could you answer yes or no?
in
and then
proof, and I just want to caveat that, in proof, I reviewed the flume information and I felt figure 6 wasn't accurate and there was deeper flooding across the site, wasn't shown. And then I go on to evidence this in my Appendix 12, which shows flooding up to 300 mil deep. What I do also note is the new, more accurate EA flood maps. And within those flood maps, a tighter grid of information has been used to represent the level and topography. And that shows deeper flooding across the middle of Appeal Site A. And what I said was that depths were 600 mil across this site.
At 600 mil is what?
2 foot.
2 foot. across the site. That's your
That's in
position.
my supplemental information. It's not shown in FRA rebuttal or proof because those EA surface
Well,
water
let-
maps
let-
did
let-
not exist at the time.
Let's explore that, because my client will say there's no flooding inside his site at all.
I think
Let me
he's,
just finish, please. What I want to ask you, simply this question, do you produce any photographic evidence of flooding inside site A?
are you referring to my supplemental evidence?
Anywhere, any flood, any photographic evidence you like. Do you produce any photographic evidence of flooding inside site A?
No, because the photographs produced by the officer do not include land inside Appeal Site A.
Have you seen any flooding in your site visits of
Well, no,
inside?
because I visited on dry days. What I do include within the supplemental evidence is photographs along the road corridor, which
Yes, you do.
include appeal sites kind of C, D and B, and their reviews within that towards appeal site A.
Well, let's stick with your 2 meter position. Can I ask you this? What do you say is the depth of flooding on Stovolds Hill?
Sorry to interrupt, Mr.
Yeah.
Masters. You said 2 meters. What do you mean?
Sorry, 2 foot.
Yeah. Look,
Sorry. What do you say is the depth of flooding on Stovolds Hill? If it's 2 foot at site A, what's it at Stovolds Hill, according to your mapping?
I haven't produced that information.
Well, come on, why not?
It would be at least 600 mil.
Well, a foot.
So 600 mil is equivalent to 2 foot
2
approximately.
foot. Okay. So let's just stick with that, because you're a flooding expert. You know that cars can drive over quite comfortably over 2 foot, can't they, without there being a danger?
No,
Well, rescue vehicles are over, the wheel space is over 2 foot, isn't it? And that's been the standard position for years.
no.
So do you have any evidence anywhere that rescue vehicles or any vehicles have been unable to pass through Stovolds Hill in 2 foot of flooding?
No, but what I would say is 2 foot of flooding represents a reasonable, a deep depth of flooding. And I think, here we go. So I've got my supplemental. So if we look at Appendix B, page 17,
Is that page 17 of 20 that you're?
yes, it is.
So in the appendix, yeah.
So Appendix B, page 17 of 20.
Sorry, I'm sorry to say, but I don't think we're going to finish tonight. Not by 5 o'clock.
Yeah,
A
that's
brackets,
the one, yeah.
Roman numeral, yeah.
So it's CD 10A, and then it's little Roman number 1.4. So little Roman numeral 1.4, And then it's page 17 of 20 of Appendix B.
So I've just indicated to you that I'm not going to finish tonight.
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
Yep, so, yeah, so you'll see from that picture, and this is the morning after the flood event. And I think the time of this is just before 10, and it shows an abandoned car next to floodwater. And my conclusion here is that vehicle, an average sized car, has experienced flood damage from passing through the floodwater on Stovolds Hill. I think the question was regarding emergency vehicles, and
Where do you,
I would say that would be similar to a police vehicle, and that would also be damaged.
sorry, where do you say in your evidence anywhere, in your rebuttal, that that's an abandoned car that's been damaged by
I don't.
floodwater?
I make that deduction based on.
Where have you made that deduction in your written evidence
I
up till
haven't.
now?
I'm making it now.
Well, are you really? That's new evidence. Can I have an adjournment so we can get the registration number of that vehicle and call the witness? Because this is new evidence. It's either the rule is the same for both. If we're going to have suddenly new dramatic evidence like that, I want an adjournment to consider it. Or it's excluded because it's totally new.
I think this is
I
just a
don't-
record of.
I don't think it's new evidence. The
Conditions.
photograph's been in for some time.
Yeah, but
Mr.
the
Masters.
new evidence is that, you see, that to me is just like a car passing or not passing.
I note that the bonnet of the car is raised, indicating it's not moving.
Well, there may be a reason for that, but I'm sure we can trace the owner of that car and ask him. So if it's now being said that that's by water damage, sir, which is the evidence before you, that
I'm
is new
suggesting
evidence.
that.
I don't think it's being said categorically, Mr. Masters.
Okay, sir, I'll leave it. But the same rule must apply to both of us. So let's just
It will,
look.
Mr. Masters. I always endeavour to be impartial.
You do, sir. I'm not suggesting you ever don't. I'm sorry if I'm getting a little bit frustrated with the witness. Let's look at this, okay? Let's look at these photos. Let's examine them by reference to 2 foot. Now, we'll just look at the first photo on page 1 of 20. Okay, now, first of all, we see the curb. Now, do you accept normal curb heights are about 225 millimetre?
No,
What do you say the curb heights are then?
a curb height would be in the order of 125 to 150 mil,
Okay,
and that's a
and what
that's
how
a
mu-
HB2 curb, and I'm talking about the upstand. So the
So what's
dimension
that
between
in,
the top
what's
of the
that,
curb and the road surface.
what's that in inches? 125, that's about 3 inches?
It's 5 inches.
5 inches, okay. Well, so let's work on the basis that curb's 5 inches. Let's go to the photo on the next, not the next page, because it does show a curb. So we see the 5-inch curb, and what we see is a splattering of water that's nowhere near 2 foot there, is there? That photo doesn't show a 2
No,
foot.
when I'm referring to 600 mil, I'm talking about high risk flooding, which is the 1 in 30. The events that preceded the day these photographs were taken are shown to be a 1 in 1.6 year event. And I'm saying there's deep and extensive flooding associated with a fairly frequent rainfall event.
These are the only photos you produce of any water at all, ever. Okay?
Yes, there's 20 photos.
Right. There's no historic photos you rely to show 2 foot of flooding on Stovolds Hill, is there? You don't produce anything like that, do you?
No, there is no photography showing a 1 in 30 year flood event.
Right.
What
so
we've got here is photography that shows a 1 in 1 and 3/4 year event.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've looked to see if any exists. No doubt.
I
You've
did
had the
ask.
resources of all the council, haven't you? Did you say you did ask?
I would have benefited from more photography on flooding.
Did you say
greatly.
you did ask the council?
I did ask if there was any flooding.
And there was none.
No.
Thank you. So let's look at photo 33 on page 20. So that's under 5 inches, isn't it? Because we can see the curb all the way along.
Sorry. So page number 20 of 20.
3 of 20.
Oh, 3 of 20.
Five inches of curb, we can see it all the way along, can't we?
No. So towards the upper end of the photo, the water level appears close to the top of the curb, indicating to me there's deeper water there.
Okay, 5 inches. I'm not going to dispute with you. It's the top of the curb, but you can still see the curb. Let's go to the next photo. Nearest the side. We can see the curb there, can't we? So we can see the level of water. It's 5 inches, 6 inches, if you like.
It is on the roadway, but behind where the curb is, there seems to be a depression where water level is deeper.
Yes, but that's not, and we're just talking about water on the access. And on the basis that the access is the problem. And since you're there, that's a site C and D. We can see they're dry, can't we? The residential parts.
So in the background, yeah, there's some parked caravans and there is no floodwater in that
No.
area.
And when we come to page 5 of 20, again, we can see the top of the curb.
I would say in the foreground, we can see the top of the curb. Towards the top right of the photo, I can't clearly see the top of the curb.
Well, that may be the line of things, but we're not talking about 2 foot. We're talking about inches, aren't we? Certainly enough to drive through without causing a problem.
So that
I'd happily drive through that, wouldn't you?
so
Mr.
the flood
Fife?
depth of 150 mil or less could be driven through in a suitable vehicle.
Thank you. And let's go to photo 7 of 20. We can actually see a car traversing through it, can't we? To the start of the car. Unless you're going to tell me that one's broken
No.
down as well. 7 of 20, sir.
No, I don't believe that's a moving vehicle.
Oh, okay.
So if you look at the next photo,
Well, come back to that in a moment.
no,
okay?
no, I think I just need to clarify this point. So you suggest the photo on page 7 is a moving vehicle, and if I turn the page, I can clearly see an XC90 parked there without a driver.
They're towing something. Is that the same vehicle? Maybe. Yeah, you may be right. Let's go back. We'll come back to that towing vehicle in a moment. Go, because I missed out on page 6 of 20. Just taken from another angle. Now the depth of water there is really shallow, isn't it? Like most of the depths.
Well, no, it's reasonably deep adjacent to the broken fence posts.
Well, forgive me. The curb is 5 inches. Okay. On the roadway there, it's reasonably shallow, isn't it?
The access roadway, a decent proportion of the curb can be seen, but I do note the access way towards appeal site B is north of this access way, and the water there looks deeper.
Well, it looks deeper. Did you go bother to measure it? Did you take these photos?
No, I did not.
Right. But someone took it with a view of giving it an evidence. Where's the measuring device where someone stuck a ruler into it and then got a close-up to show how deep it is?
An accurate survey of flood depth was not undertaken during this officer visit.
No, thank you. Let's go to so we've looked at 7 of 20. Let's turn over the page. Okay. You can see the curb there, can't you? And the amount of water there that's hardly touching the tyres of that car.
Well, I believe this is some hard standing that has been installed at the southern end of Appeal Site B. So what we're looking at here is the accessway in the foreground, and that is almost covering the curb, so only the very top of it can be seen.
Well,
And
interesting.
then what we can see is water flowing almost at top of curb level there.
Let's go back to page 7 of 20, since we're, and just, I'd like to make the point, the residential part of Appeal B, which is not my site, but I'm the one dealing with flooding, it's quite clearly got no water on it at all, is it?
And photo 7, which is taken looking north towards Appeal Site B, shows dry land where the caravans are located.
Yep. Thank you. Let's go to photo 9 of 20. Now, what's useful here is we see a dustbin, don't we?
Oh,
Behind-
actually,
Sorry, you want to add something? Go on.
yes, we talked about page 8, and we had the dialogue regarding the moving vehicle. What I would like to note is Appeal Site A is visible in this photo. And I think you asked me earlier, are there any photos in and around Appeal Site A? And I draw the officer's attention to Appeal Site A shown in the background there. And below Appeal Site A, we can barely see the curb, indicating flooding 150 to 150 mil depth.
You think you can see Appeal Site A there? I can't see the entrance to Appeal Site A.
No, I
Inspector
can see a
will-
building.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't think that's Appeal Site A. I don't know where you get that from. Have you actually been to inside Appeal A? Have you gone? Do you know what the distinctive feature of Appeal Site A is? Before you get there, there's a gate going across the
I know.
road. You know the gate.
I just confirmed
Where
that I
can you
have
see- can you
been
see
to
the ga-
site twice.
Can you see the gate going across the road there in that photo?
No, I can't.
No.
But I do know that this photo is taken at the bottom of Appeal Site B, and Appeal Site A is directly west
It
of
is.
Appeal Site B,
But there's a-
separated by an area of open space, which
And
can
a-
be seen there behind the trailer.
And a pond. Because there's a pond before you get to Appeal Site A. So, which I'm surprised you haven't realised. Let's go on to photo 9 of 20, which shows again Appeal Site C and D, and the residential parts of those sites clearly dry. And we can see what appears to be some sort of dustbin behind the fence, can't we? So we can see the depth of flooding by reference to that, by reference both to the fence panels and to the dustbin. And it's not deep, it's shallow.
I note there that the flood water is flowing over the top of the curb, which is up to 6 inches deep. And I assume that's a feeder pillar, not a dustbin.
Okay.
And
but forgive
I
me,
see that electrical equipment is flooded in this situation.
we've covered the fact that the curb is 5 inches, not 6 inches.
No, I said it was in a range between 125 mil and 150
Well,
mil.
have you measured the curb?
No,
Right. And I said we'd stick with 5 inches because you didn't bother to measure it. And this wasn't done. And I'm suggesting to you that distinctly shows that the floodwater is shallow. We can see that from the dry area within a couple of meters from the end of the fence.
it may be beneficial if just on a site visit, the inspector, I could accompany, we could take a measure, we could measure the curb height and then we could just clarify that.
Yeah, we can. Well, I'm happy with that. If the inspector wants to do that, that'd be a very good idea. And again, if we go to photo 10 of 20, what's noticeable about this photo is it's dry in the front of the picture and it's dry to the rear of the picture, but there's a little area of ponding in the middle. Again, that's shallow, isn't it?
So it seems to be that part of the access road is dry, but the access way up to Appeal Site C and D has got flooding on it.
Right, but that's nothing, that's not going to create any risk of cars going across it or any restriction to cars going across it, that level of flooding, is it?
As I said and clarified earlier, these photos weren't accompanied by any measuring
Could you
to
answer the
establish
question?
depth.
It's pretty obvious, as a matter of common sense, but we're looking at shallow flooding of a few inches. You've already accepted. That's gonna
I've
co-
accepted that,
You've
you know,
already accepted.
this is
you-
around
this is-
top of
It's
curb.
me to answer the questions. Listen to them before you answer. I'm trying to be polite. Will you do the same? You've already accepted that that's not going to be a restriction for any car to go past, is it?
We're talking purely about depth here. What isn't evident from photographs is the velocity of the floodwater. So we may be talking about shallow depths of floodwater here, but we don't know the velocity.
Forgive
Could-
me. Why do you say? Why do you say?
So I
Listen
raised
to me.
that
Listen to me. I
in
haven't-
regard to safety and the ability to cross shallow water. So shallow, fast flowing water can be unsafe to cross.
Forgive me. Are you suggesting that these pictures show floodwater in transit, which is where you get a velocity? Because what these photos show is ponding, floodwater stationary. That's quite clear.
Oh no, I think there's water moving here, and just on the right of the post and rail, there seems to be evidence of water flowing towards Stovolds Hill. And I think the other photos also show water flowing by the ripples on the surface of the water.
It's a matter for the inspector and for his interpretation, but I'm going to put to you that what it shows in relation to the roadway is ponding, not moving torrents of water. Because otherwise you wouldn't have all those dry areas. Because the water would be constantly flowing over it if it's flowing from A to B, but it's not.
So the water is flowing here. The point I made was that the speed and the extent at which it's flowing cannot be determined from photos.
What I asked you about was vehicles. They would have no difficulties of transiting water on the road at this point that may or may not be flowing over the curb into the ditch.
Yeah, well, I accept. So I think one of the earlier photos showed a Volvo. That type of vehicle could cross this.
So no danger to health, no concerns in relation to residential amenity caused by excess floodwater in these photos.
So I'm a bit unclear of are we talking danger to health, did you say?
Yeah, I'm talking about the classic exception test concerns, whether or not this is going to be the flooding is going to cause a danger. No evidence of that from these photos.
No, but what these
No,
photos show.
that was no. I got the.
So
finally-
it cannot be seen because obviously on this day, a council officer attended site, drove up here and took photos.
Yeah, this is the only evidence you have of flooding at any stage over the years. Okay,
Yes.
this is your evidence. Okay.
Yes,
No
it is.
evidence of danger that's going to stop residential occupation of these sites by this level of flooding in your photos.
No, but what I
No,
would
thank
say
you.
is the PPG tells us to consider the design flood, which is the 1 in 100-year rainfall event, and include an appropriate alert for climate change. And what is recorded here is flooding associated with a 1 in 1.67
Yeah,
year event.
all these
So an
photos-
event far less than the design event.
All these photos taken on the same day, almost all around about 10:42, 10:47 on the 27th. We know that. So they're quick one after the other. Okay, so let's go to photo 1220. That shows.
I think we've skipped over 11 there, have
Oh,
we?
have we? If you want to go to 11.
I was just going to say that shows water with ripples on it indicating movement.
No, we haven't slipped over that. You made
No,
that
page
comment.
11.
You made that comment a few moments ago on when we were on photo 11. I don't know whether those are ripples or whether or not that's dirt. I don't know. Sorry. Did someone laugh? That was very impolite. And inexcusable, in fact. Photo 12. So another view of Stovolds Hill going, I think, towards the main road. We see a car parked, don't we? Possibly parked.
Yeah, so I believe this photo is from the access track looking towards B, C and D.
Right, and we can
I
see
think, yes, I think so.
we can see a dustbin in the front, can't we, on wheels?
Yep.
Right, which is why I said I thought the other thing was a dustbin because they look very similar. And again, that's on dry land, isn't it?
The left of the photo is dry, the
Yeah.
right of the
So
photo
no
is wet.
no flowing water there of any velocity, is there?
On the left of the photo, it shows a bin. On the right of the photo shows flood water flowing towards Stovolds Hill.
Sorry, I don't see flowing floodwater at all. I see some ponding.
I see that as flowing, and I note the ripples on the top of the water.
Well, forgive me, but perhaps the inspector will need to get his magnifying glass out and examine that in more detail. And well, we might have to leave that to him, but I don't see that. So let's go to photo 13 of 20. Again, the depths there are really shallow. We can see that from the dryness in the front, and we can see that from the structures.
Yeah, so on the left of the photo, so obviously this road is being built with a crossfall, indicating that one side of the road is higher than the other. So rain landing on it would be shed to the lower side of the road, which is where the curb is, and where the flood water is deeper.
Well, I disagree. That's hello. See, this is a really good photo because it shows along the access road, and we can say part of the access road is dry and part of it isn't. And we can see the depth of the flooding by reference to the 5-inch curb. And you can see most of that curb.
Yes, that's noted.
No flowing water there, is there? Or if it is, it's flowing very tranquilly.
Yes, it's noted that there are no ripples on that water.
Yeah. So it's it seems to be torrents of flooding elsewhere, but not in that photo. How could that be? Bearing in mind the flood map shows that, and your evidence that it all flows down to the road.
So I do know that it all flows down to the road. But I do note this floodwater appears to be moving slowly from the lack of any ripples on the top of the water.
And I suggest that's indicative. And we can see that in the next photo as well, can't we? 15 of 20. Or are you going to say that's flowing faster? And that's a greater depth, because it seems to me that's just the same photo taken a little bit further up the road. You can still see the 5-inch curb.
Yep, there's definitely floodwater in that photo, and on the right-hand side, a curb can be clearly seen.
Now, what we have is, just so we understand, is we don't have flooding from a river or a brook or anything else. What we have is flooding caused by rain, don't we?
This is surface water flooding, yes.
Yes. Then we've got 16 of 20. Is this near the top of the junction?
I think this says it's looking east across the access road.
So still going up to Stovolds Hill?
I believe so, yeah.
There's
Looking east.
there's hardly any flow of water on there at all, is it? But
Yeah.
what you say is it should be flowing downhill, and this should be downhill. So this should have plenty of water on it. If the velocity was as you say. Can you explain that? Because water does flow downhill, doesn't it?
Water does flow downhill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if this was if the water you described as having a velocity was flowing downhill, it hasn't reached here yet, has it?
Well, there's no level information provided as part of the application, so
It's just not
I
logical,
can't
Mr.
comment
Smythe.
on the level of this road and the longitudinal gradient of
Well,
that
it's,
road alignment.
the inspector will see it when he goes there, but your evidence is it all flows downhill to the road.
Yes, because the watercourse flows from west to east.
Yeah. So why isn't that covered in water? If your evidence is that that's the problem, and then we come to the car that you say has been water damaged. Are you really saying that? I mean, look at the depth of water on that area. We can see it's inches. We can see dry areas to the right, and we can see dry areas to the top, and dry areas to the left.
Yeah, I just for your note, Inspector, I've looked at the rainfall event, which was an 8.5 hour event overnight. I would estimate the peak floodwater would have occurred before the time of these photographs.
Where's that in your evidence? Where have you made that interpretation before? Because I think you're just making up evidence on the hoof as we go along now.
No, I haven't stated that
No.
in my evidence.
Well, he
but
did state it in chief, actually.
Yes, I've stated it in chief.
I don't think you did, but there we go. Not in relation to these photos, by an interpretation of these photos. But that's not the question I asked you. Okay, this photo doesn't show a great depth of water, does it?
It's unclear.
You say it's
What it does
unclear.
show is flooding on the Stovolds Hill
And
junction.
I would say it clearly shows it to be shallow. You can see that because of the dry areas you can see in the photo. Might have been inspected with his interpretation at the end of the day. Although we've got another picture of the same from a slightly different position, 18 of 20, where we can still see the curb, the bollards that are there. So it does seem as though the car's broken down, possibly, you might argue, but we don't know for what reason.
No, all we can see there is a car with the brake lights on. We can see some road cones and there's floodwater on Stovolds Hill.
Can't we see two cars there? The one that's broken down, allegedly, is the one in front, isn't it?
So I only note from an observation now that the one in the foreground of the photo has the brakes applied because the brake lights of the vehicle are on.
Yeah, which tends to suggest it's moving or has moved and is slowing down.
Probably associated with the floodwater.
Well, that's probably right. When you see an extent of things, you slow down and pass it slowly, don't you? Don't you?
Oh, was that a question? Yes.
Yeah. So no difficulty in passing over that water because that vehicle appears to be doing that. Do we know whose vehicle it is with the bonnet open? Could it be one of the members of the council who's taking these photos?
Are we talking about page 17
Yeah,
again?
the one we saw before with the bonnet open. Could it have been one? Could it have been a member of the council?
Unlikely.
Why? We just simply don't know who it is, do we?
No, we don't. All we can see there is a car that looks to be stopped,
Yeah.
and the bonnet is open,
Yeah.
and the car is located directly next to floodwater.
Yeah. We don't know who that is or why the bonnet's open. That's the reality of that, isn't it? Page 19 of 20. View from access to Weeping Villiers Park, looking across Stovolds Hill, ditch east side of Stovolds Hill. So is this now at the main road of Stovolds Hill? Yeah, must be, because it's one Stovolds.
Yep, so this looks to be a photo taken on Stovolds Hill, looking east.
Yep.
And what can we see is some kind of
Yeah.
ditch
And
or
again,
quit.
you say in that area, depths of flooding of 2 foot. But this doesn't show anything like that, does it?
No, what I say is for a high risk situation, so a 1 in 30 rainfall event, far in excess of what was recorded the night before these photos would have deeper depths
Well, you say, so,
of over, well, 600 mil, as I said. So-
and you
so-
say so deeper depths, but it would be inappropriate for planning permissions to have been allowed on this site because of the level of concern with the depths of surface water flooding on the main road.
So what sites are you talking about? Are you talking about the appeal sites or the wider
No,
site?
but I'm talking about Lydia Park, the ones that were
I
passed by the
didn't, I
council.
didn't make a comment on that.
I know you didn't. And I'm wondering why. But let's go to paragraph 20 of page 20 of 21, because now we are on the main road for certain, because we can see that the road going to the sites is to the right. And we can see, again, surface water flooding on the main road, but nowhere near 2 foot of surface water flooding. Quite clearly enough, because we can actually see a car coming along the road. If you look
Yeah, so this
closely.
is a view looking south. So this must be north of the Stovolds Hill.
Yeah, it's going
access
towards
track.
it's going towards Dunsfold Aerodrome, and this used to be the main entrance to the aerodrome.
I think this, yeah, this must be a view south, and this is north
Yeah.
of the access track junction, looking
yeah.
south.
And we've got all and we've got all the gypsy sites that tail off of this main road to the right, and then we get down to.
I'm not sure whether, so there's some flood water coming in from the right. I don't think that's the Lydia Park access track. I think that might be a field, and then some overland flooding is coming in off the fields, and that flood.
I don't
water-
think it's the same access we were looking at
I
before.
don't think it is,
because
sir. I think that's
that
right.
had curbs around
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But it is the main road, so down
Yes.
towards Dunsfold.
Yeah. Well, that concludes the review of the photographs, I think, doesn't it? With which number
It does, so
20.
it's probably an appropriate time, so I'm going
I
to.
don't think we've any choice,
No.
given where we are. I'm going to have to call proceedings.
So
to-
may I
to
just,
post-
I did try and finish, and assist you as much as I can, but so in the end of the day, there are other areas I need to deal with, and it's just one of those things. I apologise.
Right, well, we need to adjourn now. I understand from council that people don't want to take things away with them, they can be left. Is there any update, Mr. Linton, where we should put them?
Well, I expect there will be somewhere we can lock things up for yourself. I don't know whether or not there'll be somewhere for everybody at large, because
Oh, I
obviously
see.
that's,
So I'll take mine away, sir, so don't worry about me.
I mean,
I mean, I'm quite happy for mine to stay where they've been.
yeah, well, I mean, certainly I can take instructions from John where.
upstairs, but that's there's a secure room upstairs, because it'll be here, it'll be there until Tuesday, and I think that room might be used.
Right, on Tuesday, if it's locked away somewhere else, how will I get at it early Tuesday morning?
I'll ensure that you can, I'll be available.
Right,
I'll make it, arrangements, or me, or an email and a number of stuff. What time you
But-
can come in, because you came in early?
I'm usually here at 8 o'clock.
Yeah, okay, yeah, we can. We'll facilitate that.
Okay, thank you.
So, what I could say, which might help, is that you could schedule us to start at 9:30 on the basis that if I'm not here by then, it'll be because of the M25. But I could, but I could try and assist you because I have been here earlier for most days. The difficulty is when you get here, you need about.
Well, that's it. You need some time when you get here, don't you?
You do.
To organise things with your team.
But I'm trying to bit of assist you if I could, sir. If you,
Well, obviously that would help. So I don't, as I've said throughout on this matter, I don't want to cause anybody any undue difficulty or stress in terms of getting here. It's got to be reasonable. I mean, I don't know whether travelling affects anybody else in terms. Mr. Masters is making the suggestion for an earlier start.
Inspector, I think, I mean, I'm very grateful to Mr. Masters for that, although the difficulty might be if there was a problem with him arriving, with it being equivocal, it may be that wouldn't work. But I'm just thinking in terms of where we are with the inquiry process, whether we need to have a think about the timetable. And I know you've got difficulties after next week of when you might be available. If we needed it, would you be able to do a virtual day at some future time if we were dealing with things, if we got the evidence done next week. I think we need to start thinking about that sort of thing, given where we are.
Yes,
Well, I think that from the client's point of view, in person allows them to hear it, and they're here, and it's not wise to go into a remote situation where people's access to it is in question.
I think that's a fair point, Mr. Cottle, which I've certainly got flexibility in terms of the site visits, which would produce some time. Can you let me think about that over the weekend?
I mean, well, just to be clear in your timetable, so we're still on what we were to have finished by the end of the second day. So flood risk, your timetable Wednesday afternoon. So we're 2 days behind and a bit. So I've got your updated timetable was Tuesday for ecology, and then you had fitted things in around that. But I mean, I may be being overly pessimistic, but the way things are going, I think we need to start thinking about when you could be available to either have a virtual day or a in-person day if we get the evidence done next week, but we don't get any further. So I just raised that for you to think about.
Well, I can give you some information on my availability now.
Yeah.
I can be available I can make myself available the following week, the next, but of course I don't know is whether other parties have commitments or not into what would become week 3.
And have you got a clear diary in terms of any day? So if we all
During that
managed
week?
during the next week, assuming we haven't got, because it would be the advocates rather than necessarily witnesses. So it would need 3 of us to have a day in that week when we could all be here.
The week beginning the 16th, I can be free. Yeah, I think without constraint.
But commitment early in that week, and Mr. Woods has commitments later in that week. So it'd be quite difficult for him.
Right, well, I suppose it depends where we're up to, Mr. Cottle. If we've got, yeah.
I'm in Monday, and then the rest of the week in the public inquiry. The first day I have one day, the 23rd of June, the 30th of June, 1st of July, the next day is unavailable.
Right, yes. Yeah, that week beginning the 30th of June is, as things stand, an on-starter for me. I mean, it would be preferable if anything can be done with other commitments to follow straight on with the week beginning the 16th, but I understand that there are commitments, clearly.
Another one on the 16th.
Right.
So I think it would be week commencing 23rd.
I can do the 23rd of June.
I can't do, no, I'm travelling and at another event on the 24th. 23rd and 24th I can't do. I'm already committed.
Leaves
That-
the 25th, 26th, 27th.
The only day I can do, my personal would be the 27th on the Tuesday.
Oh, okay.
So I could do the 27th of June. That's the first one, which is a viable day for me. So if we could do the 27th of June, that is a day I could do.
Okay,
Could you do the 27th of June?
so that's a possibility, if we can get through everything else.
But that's presumably for closing submissions or site visit and
Hope-
closing submissions.
I would like to hope so.
So Inspector, would you like us to err on the side of caution and ask that we block our diaries provisionally
Yeah,
for that day, just in case anything else comes in for anybody, so we've got it covered?
I think that would be wise.
Okay.
Mr Woods?
Yeah, from my point of view, so I'm on holiday, but that's not particularly a problem if it's just closing
No,
submissions
that's
because I
right.
can get
Yeah,
one of my colleagues to come because we're
that would be fine.
instructing.
That would be
So
fine.
it's
Mr.
fine,
Woods.
as long as it's, what I don't want to happen is get to there, oh, well, you said you were available. And it's
I'll
not.
do the site visit if we're doing the site visit.
Yeah,
If Mr.
I-
Woods
I'm
is
sure
away.
somebody else could be made available for that. Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
Thank you very much, Inspector.
Is there anything else, Mr Cottle? Mr Masters, anything else you need to raise? Mr Lintott?
Except I think we've got some, we may have some of the paperwork that you asked for. So we've been making some photocopies of that. So I don't know if we've got
Well,
any of that ready.
Right, well, I do need to adjourn, so they can just be left on the desk.
Yeah, we can do that for you. Yeah.
And my boxes for moving, there'll be 2 boxes and a carrier bag. I'll just leave them on the table.
Fantastic. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you very much, Inspector.
Okay. Sorry, Mr Cottle, did you want to?
Well, if you're going to receive them when we reconvene, could we have them right now?
Yeah.
Right, so we're now adjourned until, going to try for 9:30 on Tuesday next week.